Hi folks, Robert Lowell Goller here. Thanks for joining us for our weekly chat about local history. This week I had a plan that I was going to start taking these live videos, or at least pre-recording them if it wasn't possible to go live, to take them on the road and to go to places where there was interesting history, or if there was something I was talking about and I'd actually be in the location. And I have several ideas. Some of the ideas came from you. And I went to go try to go live. At least I was going to pre-record in case there was issues with the internet access. However, it is super windy out there today, dangerously windy actually, and I didn't think it would be a good idea to be out in the fields, if you will, on a windy day, the camera falling over, all that. So that is coming. I had talked to a couple people about that, got some great feedback about the potential to do that. So I've just flip-flopped some of my subjects around, and actually this subject topic that has been brought to me is timely this week too. So the others weren't necessarily as timely, but I was excited to go out and actually do something new with these videos. So stay tuned for that. Again, appreciate the support of it. This week, actually the last couple weeks, we've been hearing about, and people have been asking me in conversation, my thoughts about what's happening with the current administration in Washington and these efforts to perhaps censor history, to ignore certain aspects of history. The Smithsonian, you're reading about efforts to only include patriotic exhibits and patriotic research, things that put the United States in a good light. And this is blatant in the executive orders that are coming out of the administration. So they want patriotic history, and this has been something that's been talked about in the past as well. But it was very blatant, very direct in the executive orders that we don't want certain parts of our past explored, perhaps pulled down, not put in exhibits anymore. There's been discussion about what that impact will have on the African American history museums, the Smithsonian's history exhibits, all of that. And so, as I was talking to folks, they were asking my opinion on it. And of course, as a historian, I'm concerned about that, along with other historians, national historians, people who are more involved in it. But on the local level, I've seen this happen too, and not necessarily with the government saying that they want to, that the government is censoring or saying that we don't want certain parts of our history explored or ignored or banned in some cases. But there are things that have happened that encourage us to ignore those things, to veer away. And that's what's happening in Washington right now. If you see that they're not necessarily coming out and saying, you can't talk about this, you can't talk about slavery, you can't talk about, they're not coming out and saying that, but they're either pulling funding to certain organizations unless they toe the line and pull these exhibits and pull these diversity initiatives. So they have the power to pull the money. And so if there's no money, it's hard to do exhibits or research into certain aspects of our history. So they won't come out and necessarily say you can't do it, but they'll make it very difficult to do that. That happens not in a very direct way. There's not necessarily an executive order on the local level. But when you think about the museums that you're going through and how they're funded, a lot of funding is based off of private donations. And I have been involved sometimes, it's not rampant, but sometimes where trying to encourage donations to a project that's discussing not so patriotic history or bad parts of our, uncomfortable parts of our past. I will say that I have experienced that where it's harder to get people to give support and funding to projects that might be uncomfortable. So it may not be the government doing that, but it may be funding in other ways. Another thing that happens, though, more that I think is perhaps even more dangerous as we talk about what we talk about in history, what we ignore in history, especially in local history, is our own self-censorship. And what's happening online too, a lot with your local history pages. And I just wrote down some examples of things that I think could have been handled better, or how people react to certain parts of our history that may encourage us or encourage us to self-censor and discourage us from talking about maybe uncomfortable so-called unpatriotic parts of our history, even the local history. I had posted, I'd written an article, and actually it would be included in an upcoming book. I actually just edited it for the upcoming book that I'm writing. Mary Taylor was the first, believed to be the first black student to graduate from East Aurora High School. And when I originally had put out my research about her, this was back at the turn of the century, I had gotten some criticism because some people were saying that I was celebrating this one individual who graduated from East Aurora High School without, that we were making ourselves feel better by having one graduate of East Aurora High School, that I was promoting and ignoring the history of racism in East Aurora, history of racism in all small communities and in our country as a whole. And obviously, this person who criticized me for that didn't read the article, and also in the context of that one article, you didn't see my other research that I have done, and I certainly can do a lot more research, and we can discuss it more. But I had discussed how Mary Taylor had now they didn't come out and say it. In the coverage of her graduation, she had given a speech at the graduation here in East Aurora, and they said that she had gotten a round of applause, a very hearty round of applause, I think is what the terms they used, and they recognized the struggle she went through. They said this in the article in the Advertiser, the local newspaper. They recognized the struggle she went through as a black student in East Aurora High School in order to attend school and of course to graduate school. And if you read between the lines there, they're saying that she had dealt with racism, that she had to struggle to get to attend East Aurora High School and to graduate from the school. They didn't come out and say what kind of racism she encountered. However, you can read between the lines and figure that out. It was obvious. The thing I pointed out is that the Ku Klux Klan was active here in East Aurora at the time that she was attending school. Her dad was a horse trainer. Through census records, I was able to find him. And they actually lived down at the West End in what had been the schoolhouse at the West End, and they were believed to be, and they said this in several different articles over time, the only black family living in East Aurora at the time. And I had confirmed that in the directory, it wasn't a telephone directory, but the village directory at the time, that they were the only black family living in East Aurora, because they denoted her father, Reuben Taylor, with the letters COL after his name. A person of color, colored individual, and they didn't mean it in a good way. Why you needed to put that in the phone book to warn people that you would be dealing with someone who was black, it just shows the racism of the time. And I went through that whole phone book to find out that he was the only one with those letters after his name. Again, that's a part of our history that it could easily be lost if you're celebrating the fact that we had a black student graduate from East Aurora High School, but how it could have been very easily that she was not allowed to go to school, and how many other people weren't allowed to go to school because of the color of their skin. Whether or not segregation was a legal thing or not, we had the social side of it where the school. The state of New York could have said it was illegal to discriminate based on the color of your skin, but in practical purposes, it was an issue for a lot of people, and there was racism in our community, and the Ku Klux Klan was actually actively involved. And so to ignore all that, I think sometimes when you post things on social media, or I put out, I've done some research and I've gotten some feedback that people thinking we should not be discussing those bad parts of our history. And I respectfully disagree with that. The Ku Klux Klan was active, and there's actually a lot of discussion among historians in small towns like East Aurora when you come upon lists of members of the Ku Klux Klan, or the fact that the Ku Klux Klan even actually existed. There are some people who don't think we should even be talking about the Ku Klux Klan. They think it was something down in the South, but it was actually very active in our town, in our area. There was a cross burning in Williamsville. There were meetings in Buffalo where members signed in. And so we know that there are people from East Aurora, quite a few actually, who were members of the Ku Klux Klan. And there were discussions among historians of whether or not we published the fact that local people with descendants still around, family members still around, had their grandfather, great-grandfather as members of the Ku Klux Klan, and there's a big debate about it. And I'm from the opinion, I had said I would give my opinion today, is that we do not ignore the Ku Klux Klan. You may not get, you may get backlash to talking about it, especially if there are names involved of people who whose descendants are still around. But we certainly cannot ignore it. We cannot deal with what is going on today and the racism in our country and all these things that are going on if we don't talk about how we got here. And one of the things I find fascinating is that people talk about, well, this racism isn't new, all this stuff has happened before, but we should know better today. We should learn from what happened in the past. And the Ku Klux Klan was active in the 1920s, and we have documentation of it. A bigger thing involving race that I've gotten some backlash on is when we post photographs of people in blackface on either the Aurora Town Historian website, or I've shared some things on the Facebook pages, my history Facebook pages. And you post it on, and people will have mixed reactions, but a lot of people, more than I imagine would, feel that we should not be posting people in blackface today. And no matter when the photo was originally taken. And I disagree on that. I feel if it's in context, if it's in a historical context and we are using it as an educational tool, that it can be very impactful. And what people fail to realize is that blackface performances were not just in like speakeasies and things like that. They church groups. There were churches in East Aurora that would have a variety show, and they would have people dressed in blackface for the variety show. They'd have a minstrel show, and they would have white people with blackface. A church, East Aurora churches did this. And not only did they do it, they put a picture in the East Aurora Advertiser of them in blackface to advertise the show, or to have after the show, they would have pictures of the show that was occurring. And a church. So not just these, not like a bar or anything. The Roycrofters. There was a photo I had posted back at Halloween time of a Halloween party at the Roycroft in the 1910s. And I put a note in there. I said, yes, I realize that there are people in blackface. And the focus of the picture wasn't that the folks were in blackface. There were probably 3 or 4 people you could tell were in blackface. I said, yes, I realize these folks were in blackface, and there were also men in drag as well. When we are going through photographs at the historian's office, sometimes the volunteers will catalog things, and then they'll say, I don't know what to do with these. And I'm like, you include them. And maybe we actually put them in a separate section that in case people don't want to look at them while they're going through. But I really think they can't be ignored. It's part of what was happening back then in our churches. The field day, the children would come to Hamlin Park from the schools all around the area. And there was one particular year where young children were dressed in blackface as part of their skits that they were doing in Hamlin Park, young children. So it wasn't just this, like I said, it just wasn't this a thing that was on the outskirts or in a bar somewhere or at a speakeasy. It was part of our community. And to understand the history of racism in our community or any community, and I think a lot of people feel like we shouldn't talk about it because it gives East Aurora a bad, or any town that talks about it, that might give us a, you know, a dark mark on our community and our history. But I think we can't ignore it, and it happened in every community. So to pretend that one town had this racism over another is actually ignorant. It was everywhere, and I think it needs to be documented, because we're not going to be able to understand where we are today if we don't understand what was happening out in the open back 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 25 years ago. So I think in context, I think it's okay, and actually it's vital to not ignore, not to censor unpatriotic history, racism. Some people will call it unpatriotic to look at something that was bad part of our history, and I don't think so. I think there can't be anything more patriotic than looking back at the things that we've done wrong in our history in an effort to try to correct them. Another thing that was quite interesting that I had realized that one woman actually asked me to completely pull it down off of Facebook one time, is in the 1960s and 70s we had these old magazines, and at Christmas, and they had nothing to do with East Aurora, but I had posted these photographs of Christmas advertisements in the magazines, and they were so sexist. Some of them were really, and a lot of you would remember this time period, but there was an ad for a whiskey or something, and the woman was sitting on the floor looking up at her husband, handing him the whiskey, and it had some really derogatory term about standing by or making your man happy or something after he comes home from work. And there were a whole bunch of others, and I posted them, and I had one woman write that she didn't think it was appropriate that we posted them because women don't need to be reminded of that time period. And I disagree. I think we need to look back and see what was happening then. That was a period of time when 50 years ago, not even, where women couldn't get their own bank account. They couldn't get a loan, couldn't get their own credit card. That wasn't very long ago. And when you're researching that history, to put it in the context of this is how we viewed women through the advertising that we see in the magazines of the time, I think it's very important to see that in order to understand what was happening in that time period. So I think we all need to be reminded that that was what was happening. And it doesn't mean, again, I think context is hugely important. When you put blackface out there to study it, study the pictures to show the history of it. When you put an old sexist advertisement out, it's not saying that you endorse it. It's not saying that you agree with it. And that's why I think the context is important, to say, you know, this is not good, but this is where we were. And this is where some of us might still be. And I think that's where it's important to have that context. Instead of putting it, a lot of us want to just put that stuff away in a drawer. I had someone want to rip up the pictures, and I was like, absolutely not. We need to learn from them. And I think it's really important. Again, if I just put that photo out on the Facebook page without any explanation, that would be a problem. Or used it to promote something that was either racist or sexist, that would be a problem. But in the context of history, we have to learn from it. And I think that's what the Smithsonian issue is dealing with now, is we can't be ignoring bad parts of our history. And so I thought that was an interesting take on it too, was the women in advertising was very symbolic. And I didn't think anything of it, really. I wasn't going out there to say that these are sexist. I said they're sexist advertisements, but I didn't think I was going to get as much of a reaction as I did. Another thing that's not necessarily, like I said earlier, it's hard to sometimes research history. It's not that it's being ignored, and it's not that it's being censored. It's just very difficult to find. Again, like how many black people lived here when Mary Taylor, the first black East Aurora High School graduate, tried to figure out what her world was like here in East Aurora. back in the early 1900s, it's not like there's an article in the newspaper that is telling you the racism that's going on. They don't necessarily put it in there. However, we had one volunteer at the historian's office who had a little project of finding the racism in the local newspaper. A lot of it in advertising, Native American depictions, black depictions of black people in advertising in our hometown newspaper, and that's another discussion I might write about. But it's very interesting how it wasn't that long ago that this imagery appeared in the paper. But besides that, it's often very difficult. It's not like they're putting, putting it directly into the newspaper. It's very hard to find. And one of the things that's hard to research in a hometown, local level, I have found, is LGBTQ history. And I had someone had said to me one time that they made the assumption in East Aurora that we didn't have any gay people or LGBTQ people throughout our history, because it wasn't. They were just making that assumption. When in fact, if you read between the lines and you look in the papers, the newspapers, you will find it. You'll have, and this is a whole nother probably topic of discussion, but you have women who were not married, who either it could be what they call a Boston marriage, maybe unromantic relationship, and they live together, but they chose not to be married. But there were a lot of instances where people were each other's executors or each other's next of kin, or you just can tell throughout the papers that they perhaps had a relationship. You just have to dig a little deeper to find it. And you can't be lazy when you're doing that history. But to say that there were no gay people in a small town in the past, or that they didn't come out, that they were not, and of course that's true too, but there were people living in relationships. I found several of them actually just through reading the newspaper. For you find something that you're not looking for. Obituaries, you'll find obituaries with indications that they had a relationship 100 years ago. And they won't come out and say it. And the difference is it's not like you couldn't get married back then. Same-sex couples could not get married, so it's not as if they would say husband or wife in the obituary. But it's not that we're ignoring that history. It's just so much harder to find. And so sometimes we have to do a little bit of more diligence to find that history. And we can't be lazy about doing so. So it's there. And it's an important part of our history. And there are some folks today who would want a lot of this history ignored because they don't feel like it's a good part of our history. But we need to be recognizing it, and we can't be throwing history out. We can't be ignoring it. We can't be pulling it off our websites. And we have to have as many people as possible researching the history. There are so many different perspectives. Like I research a lot of East Aurora history, and I research a lot of American history, but I'm one person, and my perspective and what I find important and how I view things and how I interpret things is so much different than someone else. So the more people involved, we should be bringing more people into it than and instead of cutting people out and cutting perspectives out. And that's my opinion. So what's happening in Washington now, particularly with the Smithsonian, with our libraries, things like that, but particularly with history, the study of history, and in some circles, particularly with the current administration wanting to get rid of unpatriotic history, things that don't put America in a good light, I think is very dangerous. And it's not just at the Smithsonian, not just in Washington, D.C., it trickles down, and funding is a big part of it. So if you see funding cut from certain areas of study and certain initiatives and certain areas of history, it will trickle down, and that's what I find dangerous. And so I don't think it's going to local communities will be immune from that. So I think we need to keep an eye on that and to make sure that our history is as diverse as possible. And that we're getting as many perspectives and not shying away from things, not shying away from blackface, and understanding where people were when they were doing this and putting the photographs of young children in blackface on the front of the Easter advertiser, and that's what happened. So we need to be studying more of it. Thank you for joining me for this, as always, for this weekly chat about local history. Again, I'm hoping to go on the road. Just today was difficult with the wind, so keep an eye on that. I want to try new perspectives, and I think it'd be kind of neat to be at the place that I'm talking about. So we're going to give that a try. And I thank you for your patience on that. Again, if you have any ideas or comments, please put them in the comments or send me a private message. I'm always open to topic ideas. And again, I am Robert Lowell Goller. I am the town and village historian, but these videos and a lot of my research are not officially connected to my job as town and village historian. Thank you for keeping history alive, and we will see you next time. Take care.